1-mile bridge.
That kind of goes on and on.
On and on for a long time. Pretty cool. And there's the old railroad bridge.
That's the old highway.
Yeah, the old highway was built from the old railroad ties. Did you know that? Pretty cool.
Remember driving down that thing?
The old railroad.
You guys are talking about this yellow one, were you? Because that's very, very sweet.
Probably good.
Probably don't have to go to the hot tub. So how was the actual moment? As soon as the sun goes down, everybody hurries off the roof. I know, that's amazing. That's fun. Yeah, it's funny. That's the point.
What do you think?
Well, yeah.
Go do a sunset sail. Sound like fun?
Uh-huh. The top. Daddy, we are on the top.
Sunset at the top.
Down that street is what?
Well, if I remember correctly, that's the southernmost point in the United States, but that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. If that's west, I think south would be more over that way.
2 quarters.
Anyway, this is just about the highest point in all of the U.S., isn't it? Yeah, fair.
The fair.
Yeah, he went up. He said he had a very good time. He went to a lot of people.
See, these cars are open, which means we get wet. If there's anybody on board who can't take the chance of getting wet for any reason, this is the time to postpone your tour. Drink anything you wish, non-alcoholic on the train is not.
Like thunder,
Okay. Today. All right. Are we ready to go? Galleons named the Nuestra Senora de Atocha and the Santa Margarita went down in a terrible hurricane about 30 miles west aboard the Atocha. $400 million worth of gold and jewels intended for the Spanish crown. Now, if you've never seen a 77-carat emerald, that's about half the size of my fist, or held a 6-pound bar of gold for United States presidents since 1912 when they were first opened for Howard Taft. Most open for Harry Truman, who spent 11 working holidays there. John Kennedy spent time there in secret summit meetings during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were last opened for President Jimmy Carter, who brought his family here New Year's 1997. Or another part of the trunk, they form another part of the trunk. Those trees can cover acres of ground. Behind it, the White House with dark green shutters is the Cosgrove home, built in 1872. Philip Cosgrove, on his ship Mangrove, was the first to reach the stricken USS Maine when it blew up in Havana Harbor, signaling the beginning of the Spanish-American War. Havana. On the right of the train, the Key West pipe. His wife went to settle his estate, but that's into the street, homeless and penniless, where she wandered until she died. It's said, though, John Fleming was one of the early partial owners of the island. Mata Case has been a lot of things. Everything from a grocery store to a flop house. Today it's a beautiful 27-room luxury hotel where Timothy Dalton, James Bond 007, stayed while making License to Kill. The most common of which will be the classic revival style of architecture. Ups of styles as well, for a couple of reasons, from the nearest lumberyard. So, if they pack their houses up on barges and bring them with them, as there was no availability of lumber here in which to build a new home. It features wraparound verandas to keep the house cooler. And ahead of the train on the far left corner are two twin Bahamian houses that were built identically by Captain L.E. Pierce for his two daughters, so there'd be no fighting. They were restored beautifully in the 1980s by Jerry Herman of Low Dolly and Maine fame. On the right of the train, the public library, the oldest public library, beside it a beautiful palm garden that features 25 varieties of the palms that are found on our island. Complete with the design. That's a little hard to see. It's this little white house with the dark green shutters. If you missed it, look back. You'll see the zigzag design of the roof. First child was a zig, second child was a zag, I guess. Ahead of the train on the right corner is where Ma Baker's Electric Kitchen stood. Hemingway and his buddies would go there for a big breakfast after an evening of adult beverages. I don't know how they afforded it. 20 to 40 cents for a full breakfast. Outrageous, interesting. Ahead of the train on the far left corner, the green and yellow building is the Perkinses. And a lot of folks in the north paint them blue just to brighten up the doldrums of a long and seemingly never-ending winter. The sponge beds were discovered in our waters in the age of the grapes, who eventually moved north. However, in 1938, the Thompson family home. Thompson family was involved in Shipwreck. Notice as we approach the Thompson house on the left corner that the front part of the house is a restoration completed. Look to the rear of the house if you'd like to see a restoration in progress. Ahead of the train on the right, if you look up the first driveway, you'll see a large red tree. That's a gumbo limbo tree, known as a tourist tree because it's always red and peeling. And ahead of the train on the left, a large tree that overhangs the street is a rubber tree. Also a member of the ficus family with its aerial roots, just like that banyan tree we saw a few minutes ago. Directly ahead of the train is Peary Court. Today it's housing for the Coast Guard. Cemetery, then was a cemetery again. First, it was a cemetery for mostly military personnel that died of yellow fever. In the 1920s, the bodies were moved to Pensacola, and this became, and the houses are built very close together, sometimes only a foot or two apart, with 3 and 4 houses built in the center of blocks to utilize every square inch of space. And as I also mentioned earlier, the houses were built mostly by ship's carpenters in flame. So after the fire of 1886, tin roofs were installed to prevent fires from spreading in that way again. Now we're on Olivia Street, which is very lush in vegetation. Very little of the vegetation that you see on the island, however, is indigenous to the island. Most are rock, with a very thin layer of topsoil over it. So they didn't want any decorative plants growing that would use the valuable nutrients from what little soil we have. That included lawn. On the left of the train, these bushes with the hot pink leaves on them are Bougainvillea. You see those in many colors all over the island. You'll notice a little white dot in the center of the colored part. That's the actual blossom. The colored part is really a new growth of leaves. Ahead of the train on the far left corner behind the white picket fence and beside the White House, that tall tree there is a sapodilla tree. Whose bark contains chicle. Now, who on my train might know what chicle would be used for? This material, when left in the sun to dry, would harden like concrete and is referred to as marl. M-A-R-L, marl. Most of Newtown, which is on our left, is made of marl. Old Town, or the original part of the island, is on our right. These operations were discontinued, however, once they understood the environmental damage being done by dredging the living coral from the ocean bottom. On the left of the train, those trees, the Martí, a revered hero in Cuba's fight for independence from Spain. He was a passionate and powerful speaker, a noted journalist and a poet. How many of you folks have heard the song Guantanamera? Raise your hand. Guantanamera, yeah, written by Jose Martí. The words say, I'm a sincere man from the land of the palms. On the right of the train is Bayview Park, some Mercedes hospital for his beautiful wife. It was a hospital up until the 1970s, and it's said that the ghost of a nurse in a blue uniform with a high, stiff collar still haunts these halls. And many patients were discharged, being of sound mind, who say they were Cuban coffee is richer and darker than American coffee. Black, it's called Bucci, with cream and sugar. Once, the high school on the others. Now, students also well to the mass line in front of the Union High School, which is over on Flagler Avenue, and it is a giant conch shell. You don't have to tell me, I already know. Ever since you got here, that's probably the high taxes to England. Okay. Came here, became known as conchs. Houses they live in, which is a unique ground-level AIDS memorial. The White Street Fishing Pier is a wonderful place to watch the sun rise over the Atlantic. And from there you can see many of the 600 species of fish that live in our waters. Now at the start of the Civil War, Martello, which was never completed because someone invented the rifled cannon, whose shells could penetrate a brick wall. So the Navy used it for target practice for a while, then as a cattle pen. Well, I guess once the ground was so well fertilized, the Key West Garden Club made it their home. Free parking, a beautiful beach, and a gorgeous ocean. You guys were partners, huh? Yeah, got together and formed a little company that I know you've heard of, the Standard Oil Company. A fairly profitable business, wouldn't you say? Henry Flagler, having made his fortune, I guess, was bored. He had a dream that somebody could get on a train in New York City and get off the train in Havana, Cuba, in which to house his guests. The crown jewel of which is on our left. The Casa he was entertained. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, Lou Gehrig. Why, Leonard Bernstein, tops of their houses and little platforms known as captain's walks and watch for the shipwreck. Now, many of the items found on the shipwrecks were kind of unusual. For example, one shipwreck was a load of Leon was looking for
Fountain of Youth.
For 200 years, pirates terrorized the shipping lanes around Key West. Such storybook pirates as Blackbeard, Black Caesar, Gasparilla, Henry Morgan, Jean Lafitte. Junior! This is Junior now, not the real one. This is a guy with the 10 most photographed homes in the United States, the Judge Vining Harris home, built in 1899. In the 1950s, this was a very popular restaurant known as Casa Cayo Hueso, where playwright Tennessee Williams and others would dine. And it used to be the southernmost house. But now, at the end of the block on the left, behind the tan wall, is the southernmost house by a full 18 inches. It was built in 1940 by author Thelma Strable, who wrote Reap the Wild Wind, a story of our shipwrecking industry that Cecil B. DeMille later made into a movie, starring John Wayne, Ray Milland, and the very beautiful Susan Hayward in her film debut. Well, folks, we've made it. We've made it to the southernmost point in the continental United States. We're 85 miles further south than Brownsville, Texas. Yeah, actually, we're 375. The little cement building to the left of the buoy is what once housed the end of the Western Union cable that connected to Cuba. Oh, what a special treat I have now, folks. Put your hands together and say hello to Mrs. Key on my left. Good morning, Mrs. Key. Happy New Year. Good morning, Mr. Key. How are you this morning? Now, Mrs. Key is blowing on
Conch.
a conch shell, of course, which is how ships communicated in the 1800s. The Key family institutions in Key West for over 100 years. On the left of the train, behind the fence, naval officer housing.
It's allowed for a cactus.
Fire destroyed it in 1983.
Beautiful.
This was a social and political meeting place for the Cuban community. They say the best dances in Key West were held up there on the second floor. The area into which we are now turning was once known as Gato Village. You know, the Cuban end of the train, slightly to the left of the train, and above the treetops, you'll be able to see the top of the Key West Lighthouse. It was built in 1847. A year of spiral steps that you can take up to the top and get yourself one awesome view of Key West.
Oh, there it is. There's
Ahead of
the
the train on the right, behind the red brick wall, is the home of Ernest Hemingway. It was built in 1850 by merchant Asa Tift and is the only French colonial on the island. It was bought for Ernest and Pauline Hemingway in 1931. Was the first house on the island to have its own swimming pool. It's here that Hemingway did his most prolific writing, and through those lush gardens wandered descendants of Hemingway's six-toed or polydactyl cats. Take a good look at that brick wall as we go by. It's made of old street brick put together by Hemingway and some of his buddies. Some say after a long night of sloppy joes. What do you think? Good morning.
How y'all doing? Good. How are you?
Sandy Cornish was a slave who purchased his freedom in Maryland, but somehow built AME Zion Church, founded by Sandy Cornish. And ahead of the train on the far right corner, that large cactus is a cirrus cactus, which has a beautiful white, fragrant blossom, but it blooms only at night when the temperature is above 80 degrees. Ahead of the train on the right corner is the Green Parrot Bar. That's one of the oldest bars in Key West, built in 1890. Their motto is, see the lower keys on your hands and knees. It's been everything from an ice house to a morgue, and you can still get a cold stiff one in there. Ahead of the train on the far left corner is an area known as Jackson Square, named for Andrew Jackson, our first military governor. Old Hickory, of course, was later president of the United States. Key West is the county seat for Monroe County, which is the longest and skinniest county in the country. One of the major restoration projects just about complete. In fact, looks like they're having the opening ceremonies now. Our old courthouse building, built in 1890. The large tree ahead of the train on the left in Jackson Square is a grand kapok tree. Its seeds are buoyant. They were used to stuff life jackets and pillows in the days before synthetics. Also, in fact, I was watching a program on the Discovery Channel the other night, too, and they said that they used the kapok to stuff teddy bears, too. I didn't know that. The building at the end of it. That is the prestigious award given by Old Island Restoration Foundation for outstanding achievement. Our average temperature here in Key West is 79 degrees. That's Robert's room. Head of the train on the left of the train, that large terracotta jug is a tinahone. The tinahone was filled with drinking water and carried on sailing ships as ballast. Those of you who suffer fears from head of the train on the right, you'll see a little white picket fence. Behind it, the Octagon House, owned in the 1980s by clothing designer Calvin Klein.
Nice.
And ahead of the train on the right corner, the peach-colored house with green shutters is one of those houses I was talking about earlier. That's the Bahama House, actually built in the Bahamas. Disassembled in large sections, loaded on a barge, brought to Key West and reassembled in 1847 by John Bartlett. Another variation on the classic revival style of architecture is the Eyebrow House, a Key West invention. The Eyebrow House is where the roof comes down over the second-story windows to shield the upstairs, hopefully keep it cool. Ahead of the train on the right, you'll see a gray house. That's an example of an eyebrow house. And ahead on the left, a pink house. That's an example of an eyebrow house. Really didn't work very well because that eyebrow trapped the hot air up in the second floor. But since we invented them, we built about 100 of them on the island, and we love them. Ahead of the train on the right, over the white picket fence, we've been on tour. Those are Hong Kong orchids, and they're blooming more beautifully this year than I have ever seen them. Thank you. Now, we talked about Key West being the richest per capita city in the United States. Well, I'm sure you heard, though, that it was over $100,000 worth of fine Cuban tobacco. Why it didn't burn is anybody's guess. Across the street from it on the left is the Key West Aloe Factory, where you can actually go and watch some mink-skin fishing buddy Joe Russell. As we cross this intersection, look down the street to your right, you'll see a yellow building that was the original site of Sloppy Joe's. Food Good's present location on the left of the train in 1937, after Joe Russell had a rent dispute with his landlord over $1. He got so mad, though, he took his booze, his bar stools, and his buddies, moved right up the street a half a block where they've been ever since. After Hemingway's untimely death in 1961, many of his personal papers and articles were found in Sloppy Joe's, including in his of then unpublished novel, Islands in the Stream. On the left corner, the large gray house with white trim is the Dr. John Fogerty house, built in 1875. Dr. Fogerty was mayor of Key West at the turn of the century and hosted an elegant lawn party for Henry Flagler when his railroad arrived in 1912. He was also very instrumental in the establishment of the Mercedes Hospital, donating time, money, and equipment to that effort. You may have noticed as we traveled about Old Town that there were very few brick buildings in Old Town. One of the few brick buildings is ahead of the train on the left. It was built in 1892 and was the original site of the public library. He lived with his 7 daughters. Features an outdoor kitchen to keep the house cooler, and today is a records museum. 7 girls in public schools, just a series of private schools, one of which was located behind the Baldwin House. Ahead of the train on the far left corner, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the oldest non-Roman Catholic church in the state of Florida. Founded in 1832, this is the 4th, much like sunglasses. You really have to be inside to appreciate the beauty of those multicolored windows. Ahead of the train on the right, the tall light pink building is the Concha Hotel, which opened in 1926. This is where playwright Tennessee Williams wrote a streetcar named Desire. Now the Concha is the Empire State Building of Key West, 7 stories tall. Wow. NBC keeps a live camera on the roof of the Concha that you can access through the internet and get a glimpse of paradise anytime you'd like. Speaking of paradise, where would you go for your cheeseburger in paradise? Anybody? Of course, Margaritaville on the right of the train. Further ahead of the train on the right, you'll see a tan building with columns in front. That's the San Carlos Institute, founded as a meeting place for Cubans in their fight for it. It was the first integrated and bilingual school in South Florida. On the left of the train is the Strand Theater, built in 1934, an example of Rococo architecture. Look at the top of the building. Doesn't it look just like a child's birthday cake?
Let's see. Can you see?
We've now reached Angela Street. Angela Street, up until 1889, was the southernmost boundary of Key West. Everything beyond this point, at that time, was uninhabited and wooded. Now, remember that because it's going to be important to us just a little bit later on in the tour. You know, a lot of folks try to negotiate the 14 blocks of Duval Street from end to end. They refer to that as doing the Duval crawl. Here's the problem. Most people either shop till they drop or drink till they sink. It's a very hard thing to do. Now, in a moment, we're going to be making a right onto Petronia Street. Shipwreck, salvaging, sponging, shrimping, and fishing. It was lined with jazz clubs and nightclubs. Many famous jazz musicians such as Dizzy Gillespie would play it. Ahead of the train at the end of the block on the right, we'll see a blue building, which is by the name of Ernest Hemingway. The Blue Heaven ahead of the train on the right corner has a very checkered past. It's been everything from a brothel to a cockfight arena to an ice cream parlor. Today it's a wonderful restaurant, complete with shops and galleries and chickens and roosters running around the yard. Boy, is that a good place for breakfast. Throughout the Civil War, Key West remained a Union stronghold, controlling the ships here. The swath that Captain Brannan cut through this end of the island was named Rocky Road for its rough terrain, and I feel that most of our streets could probably wear that moniker today. Later it was renamed Division Street because it divided it. It took two families to keep the lighthouse operational 24 hours a day. There are two separate entrances in 05. Directly on the right of the locomotive, you'll see this tree, and they're really bitter, but boy, are they great for jams and jellies and preserves. Good stuff. When we crossed the intersection, wounded soldiers. Sister Louise Gabriel had suffered through 3 full-force directed hurricanes. In 1923, she built a stone grotto in the hopes and prayers that as long as that grotto stood, Key West would be spared another devastating hurricane. And to this day, her blessing has pretty much held true, as George certainly could have been worse than it was. If you look through the opening ahead of the train, in the wall ahead of the train on the right, then as we go by, look down the side of the building, you'll notice it doesn't have many windows that open, but has instead those high doorways to allow cooling. One of them's open there, so you can see exactly how it works. In fact, CNN reported during George that Key West was wiped off the face of the map. Boy, was that comforting to my mom in Virginia, knowing that I was here and no way to communicate. We're managers of the Key West Aquarium. People were always asking him for guided tours of the island, so finally in 1958 they decided upon the train tour idea. Old number 97 was his personal signature of his work, but later on with the invention of the scroll saw became manufactured and much more commonplace. In fact, often that gingerbread was used to identify the house. By that I mean, for example, in front of the speakeasy, whiskey bottles were cut into the gingerbread, and the fancier the gingerbread, the more well-to-do the family. Buys every square inch of space. These houses are accessible only by little, narrow lanes. Ahead of the train on the right, you'll see Lowe's Lane. So we go by, look up this little lane to the right of the train. There are 4 houses up there. Over here on the left, we've got Cornish Lane. And further ahead of the train on the left, everybody get ready, we've got Biscus Lane. There's over 100 of these lanes on the island, and many of them do have unusual names, like Gruntbone Alley, Chicken Alley, and of course, Love Lane. In fact, it's hard to imagine, but on an island that's 4 miles long by 1.5 miles, look over your left shoulder at these as the original cypress, in that it's termite resistant, water resistant, and never needs painted. It was built by the Kemp family of merchants, spongers, and seamen. The name Cypress just simply stuck. You folks that have been with me have noticed on the front gate the bronze plaque designating it as being on the National Registry.
Cypress House?
Ahead of the train, second house from the corner on the right is house number 531, the Bartlum family home from Green Turtle Cay, Bahamas. They frequently entertained good friends Bess and Harry Truman. Ahead of the train on the left, behind the tall hedge, the Georgian balconies. William Curry arrived on the island in 1847 seeking his fortune. He got that fortune buying the right of the train is the Curry Mansion. It's a Newport cottage-style mansion that features 20 rooms of antiques to explore. Ahead of the train on the far left corner is the break. For those of you who just joined us, he was our first public health officer. He was born in this house in 1847, died 80 years later in the Pirates in the 1700s. Just past the Heritage House Museum, look down the lane, you'll see a little green cottage behind it. That's the Robert Frost cottage where the famous poet would stay when he came to visit his good friend, Miss Jessie Porter. On the left corner, the white building is the first Pan American Airways ticket office. Today, a lovely restaurant owned by actress Kelly McGillis. Hey, you might remember him, spent his 11 working holidays. You know, a lot of people thought he was here for the deep-sea fishing, but the truth of the matter is he got sick anytime he was on the water. Give him hell, Harry was really here for the late-night poker games, smoking his big stogie in his favorite Hawaiian shirt. Ahead of the train on the right corner is the Audubon House, which was owned by Captain John Geiger. He was good friends with John James Audubon, the famous artist. Allowed him to stay there and paint the beautiful birds of Key West. Incidentally, this was the first restoration honored by Old Island Restoration Foundation, and it was recently featured on the History Channel in Haunted History. They say there's all kinds of little ghosts and goblins and things in there. Directly ahead of the train, slightly to the left, an American flag on the top. That's the Shipwreck Historium. I highly recommend it. They combine theater, state-of-the-art laser technology, priceless artifacts, rare film footage. And you go up that big tower, and that is the best panoramic view of the harbor and city. Stay for as long as you'd like, taking pictures. Anybody wants to go, let me know at the end of the tour. I've got $1 off coupons for it. On the left of the train, our Little Red Depot, where Joe's waving to us. That's where our adventure began, and that's where you folks who got on at the Flagler station will be going to continue your tour. Right there on the left at our Little Red Depot. We're now going to make a left and head toward Mallory Dock, where every evening at sunset, they have a grand sunset celebration. Now, you folks can probably tell we're rapidly reaching the conclusion of our tour. You can also probably tell I enjoy very much being your guide. I sure hope you've enjoyed the tour.
We're going to be going on the Liberty Company. Sell that in it. Hopefully. Looks like this.
I'm coming in my neighbor. Right next to me.
Great pictures. Did you print at work? It wasn't on the photo paper. It was on regular paper.
That boat over there, the mainsail weighs 3,000 pounds, the foresail weighs 400. Tired of it. Well, the coast is so much nicer on this side of the country. It's considerably more affordable. Right. And water's warmer, and it's the air's cleaner. The air's cleaner. Yeah. They don't stick you for so many taxes.
Alright, we'll be your tenants. I have a Bible.
Well, I bet second step. Well, this supposed to be around.
Mommy was in the picture house.
May goes back down the
Yeah. Jesus Prada. Daddy, now with your sunglasses.
No.